May 2, 1931. Gauley Bridge, West Virginia. Roosevelt Singleton was 29 years old when he walked out of the tunnel for the last time. He had come north from Georgia 12 months earlier, following word of work. Real work. Paying work. The kind of work a man could believe in during a depression that had swallowed everything else. He walked out of the mountain that afternoon, coughing so hard his ribs ached. The foreman told him to go back to the bunkhouse, told him he was fine, told him it was tunnel dust, nothing more. They called it tunnelitis. They had a name for it and everything. Roosevelt Singleton died 12 days later. His death certificate said pneumonia. His family in Georgia never learned the truth. For decades, they believed he had simply run away. Inside the mountain, the air was white, not dark, white. A permanent cloud of pulverized silica filled the tunnel from floor to ceiling, thick enough to obscure a man's hand in front of his face, the kind of white that coats your throat before you even reach the drill face. The sound was a continuous scream. Pneumatic drills hammering at nearly pure sandstone, blasting loose a dust so fine it moved like smoke, so small it passed through cloth like it was open air. The engineers knew what the rock was. Core samples taken before construction began showed it clearly. High-grade silica sandstone, some of it nearly 90% pure silicon dioxide. Ground into powder and inhaled, it is glass. Microscopic glass, cutting the lungs from the inside, building scar tissue until the lungs go rigid, until breathing becomes labor, and then becomes impossible, and then stops. They knew. That is the sentence that does not go away. They knew before the first man descended. The project was called the Hawk's Nest Tunnel, 3 miles through the side of Gauley Mountain in Fayette County, West Virginia. Union Carbide and Carbon Corporation, the same company that would later kill thousands in Bhopal, India, needed cheap hydroelectric power for its electrometallurgical plant in Alloy. The New River ran nearby, fast and deep. Divert it through the mountain, drop it down a shaft, spin turbines. Simple enough if the mountain cooperated. They hired Reinhardt and Dennis of Charlottesville, Virginia to do the drilling. Groundbreaking was March 31, 1930. The Depression had already hollowed out Appalachia. Men were desperate. Word spread south. Come to West Virginia. There is work. Nearly 5,000 men came. Most of them were black, migrant workers from Georgia, Alabama, the Carolinas, men who rode freight trains north looking for anything. They arrived at the company camps at Gauley Bridge and Veneta and found 8-foot by 10-foot boxcars segregated by race, 20 men to a structure built for 4. They were handed company scrip instead of dollars. Currency that could only be spent at the company's commissary, at the company's prices, at the company's interest. White workers earned more. Black workers received less, were assigned the deeper sections of the tunnel, the sections with the worst ventilation and the densest dust, and were told their masks were unnecessary. Supervisors, many of them company men, wore masks. Workers were told the masks would slow them down. In the first months, something like pride took hold anyway. These were men who knew how to work with their hands, men who had grown up with physical labor. And the tunnel was real, and the mountain was real, and the money, such as it was real. The drills were magnificent machines, massive, heavy, Ingersoll-Rand pneumatic rigs that bit into rock with a sound like the earth tearing. A good crew could advance 30 feet a day through ordinary sandstone. Here, through this mountain, through this particular deadly rock, they pushed faster still. Reinhardt and Dennis had a bonus clause: finish early, earn more. So the 2-hour waiting period between blasting and re-entry, the period designed to let dust settle, was quietly abandoned. Men went back in while the air was still white, still glass, still killing. The tunnel filled with bodies in motion. Hundreds of men at the drill faces, hundreds more hauling muck, running pipe, building the wooden forms that would eventually line the bore. The foreman moved through the haze shouting. You could hear everything through the stone: the drills, the blasts, the distant rumble of ore carts on steel rails. You could smell the exhaust from the gasoline engines, sharp and sweet against the mineral tang of the dust. On good days, when a section of tunnel broke into a wider seam and the air moved a little, men would stop and breathe and look at each other and almost smile. On the other days, the white days, nobody talked much. You kept your head down and drilled. By late 1930, men were dying, not slowly, fast. Doctors in Gowly Bridge were seeing something they had no framework for. Young, healthy men in their 20s and 30s collapsing with lungs already destroyed, lungs that looked, under autopsy, like stone. Acute silicosis. Ordinarily, the disease took 20 years. These men were dying in 5 months. The rock was too pure, the exposure too total. A man who spent 6 months inside that tunnel had inhaled enough silica to fill his lungs with a kind of mortar, gray-white and irreversible, and there was nothing to be done. No cure then, no cure now. You breathe until you cannot, and then you stop. The company doctor gave them pills. He had a name for their disease, tunnelitis, and he had pills, and the pills did nothing because there was nothing pills could do. And the men kept dying. When they died inside the company camps and could not be transported back to their families in the South, they were taken at night, under darkness, in flatbed trucks to a farm outside Somersville owned by a woman named Martha White. Her son Handley ran the local funeral parlor. He charged $50 a body and had, by his own account, plenty of business. The black workers could not be buried in white cemeteries. This was West Virginia in 1931, Jim Crow country, and the rules of segregation held even for the dead. They were laid in unmarked rows in a cornfield, rocks for headstones, nothing written. Some families were never notified. A family in Georgia waited for a letter that never came and finally decided their son had run away. The company was informed. Management reviewed the numbers. Union Carbide's own report would later note that 80% of underground workers had become sick, left the site, or died within 6 months of starting work. The company paymaster, his name is in the record, is reported to have said that he knew they were going to kill them. He just didn't know they'd kill them so fast. The tunnel was completed in December 1931. Reinhardt and Dennis collected their bonus for finishing ahead of schedule. The hydroelectric plant at Glen Ferris began generating power for Union Carbide's smelting operations. Electricity flowed. Profits were calculated. In May 1931, the Fayette Tribune had tried to publish the story. A judge issued a gag order. The paper went silent. 5 years passed. It was only in January 1936 that a Newsweek article brought the disaster to national attention and Congress held hearings. Representatives from Reinhardt and Dennis declined to appear. One submitted a letter. It read, in full, "We know of no case of silicosis contracted on this job." The Congressional Committee called the tunnel a project completed with grave and inhuman disregard for all consideration for the health, lives, and future of the employees. The workers who survived and the families of those who did not had filed 538 lawsuits seeking $4 million in damages. They settled for $130,000. Half went to the attorneys. The workers themselves received almost nothing. Black unmarried men, $400. Black married men, $600. White unmarried men, $800. White married men, $1,000. A value placed on a man's life, sorted by race, printed in settlement documents, filed in court, signed by lawyers. Union Carbide's records from the tunnel were later found to be incomplete. Some had been destroyed, some were simply gone. The exact number of dead at Hawks Nest Tunnel will never be known with certainty. The 1936 congressional hearing attributed 476 deaths. A 1986 epidemiological study by Dr. Martin Cherniak of the University of Connecticut placed the number at 764. A 2002 study by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health estimated close to 1,000 men died from silicosis contracted inside that mountain. Some historians believe the true toll approached 2,000. The range itself is an indictment, not of uncertainty, but of intention. When you destroy the records, the dead become uncountable. And when the dead cannot be counted, no one can be held responsible. The disaster is not taught in American schools. When West Virginia published its Federal Writers Project guide in the late 1930s, Governor Homer Holt demanded that all references to Hawks Nest be softened or removed. He believed the coverage discredited the state. After leaving office, he became general counsel for Union Carbide. Today, from a picnic overlook above Gauley Bridge, tourists can see the tunnel gate below, a dark opening in the mountain beside the new river. The river is beautiful. The mountain is green. The hydroelectric plant at Glen Ferris still operates. Power still flows. In 2009, a memorial was installed near Summersville Lake, a few miles from the farm where some of the workers were buried in unmarked graves. The memorial lists names where they could be found. Not all names could be found. The rocks that once marked the graves in Martha White's cornfield have long since been moved. The graves themselves may have been disturbed by road construction. No one is certain. Sheila Flack Jones learned only as an adult that the uncle her family had believed ran away had in fact died in the tunnel. Her father had grown up thinking his brother had abandoned them. He died thinking that. She said she was heartbroken that her family lived and died believing a lie, that they never knew the truth, that a man who died drowning in his own scarred lungs in a boxcar in West Virginia had been erased so thoroughly that his own blood forgot him. The mountain took 3 miles and 9 months to drill. The men who drilled it are mostly forgotten. The power the mountain generates is still running. Somewhere in the circuits, in the draw of electricity through copper wire, in the hum of industry that built the American century, there is something that belongs to Roosevelt Singleton and the 900 or 1,000 or 2,000 men who breathed the white air and died without their names on anything. What was taken from these men was not only their lives, it was the right to be counted, to be numbered, to have a certificate that told the truth. The company doctors who wrote pneumonia on death certificates were not confused men. Silicosis was a recognized disease, documented in medical literature going back 2 centuries, known in the coal fields as quarryman's disease, known in the granite sheds of New England, known in the potteries of Ohio. The pathology was in the textbooks. The engineers who reviewed the core samples knew what silica did to lungs. And yet, the decision was made, not once, but continuously, every morning that the 2-hour waiting period was skipped, every shift that the masks went only to the supervisors, every week that the ventilation fans sat idle because running them slowed the drilling, to trade the lungs of 5,000 men for a completion bonus and a corporate electricity bill. The arithmetic of what happened here is simple. Union Carbide needed power. Power required the tunnel. The tunnel required labor. Labor was cheap because the Depression had made men desperate, and black men from the South were cheaper still, and more disposable, and less likely to have lawyers or newspapers who would listen. The bonus for finishing early exceeded the cost of settling with the dead. That calculation was made. Someone made it. Sat at a desk in Charlottesville or New York and ran the numbers and found them satisfactory and signed a document and went to dinner. The families of the workers received almost nothing. The settlement records are still filed in the Fayette County Courthouse. If you want to find them, you can. You can read the dollar amounts assigned to each man based on his race and marital status. You can read what America decided his life was worth. The document is not hidden. It never needed to be hidden. The men it concerned were already buried in an unmarked cornfield, and their families were in Georgia, and there was no one left to object. The memorial near Summersville Lake was dedicated in 2009, 78 years after Roosevelt Singleton walked out of the mountain for the last time. The names carved into it are incomplete. Many names were never recorded at all. Workers who arrived without paperwork, who died without witnesses who would speak, whose deaths were attributed to other causes on documents that the company later found convenient to lose. The exact number will never be certain. That uncertainty is not an accident of history. It is the final act of the cover-up. You cannot prosecute the murder of a man whose death was never recorded. You cannot build a memorial for men whose names were never written down. The mountain doesn't remember them. America never learned them. The wind moves through the gorge the same as it always has, and the river runs the same color it always has, clear over the rocks, reflecting the green of the West Virginia hills, and the tunnel mouth is dark against the limestone cliff, and inside it is quiet now, and cool, and the dust has settled into the walls over 9 decades, and there is no one left to cough. The power still runs. Somewhere downstream, in the warm hum of an electric furnace, in the arc of a welder's torch, in the quiet draw of a motor turning, something of these men persists. Not their names, not their faces, not the sound of their drills, or the smell of the dust, or the feel of a cold West Virginia morning before the shift began. Just the work stripped of the men who did it, the way America prefers it.